Welcome to Alexandria, a Hellenistic World podcast. Episode 3b, Selections from Aristotle, Politics, and Anaximenes, Rhetoric to Alexander. Hi all, welcome to our first B-side episode. So far, episodes 1, 2, and 3 have only been A-sides, our main narrative. When appropriate, episodes like our last one, episode 3, will have B-sides, where I narrate the real words of the ancient people featured in the previous story. In the future, these will include monumental inscriptions like the satrap stele, or collections of personal letters preserved in papyri. In this case, you'll hear today the very words of Aristotle and Anaximenes, the two philosopher tutors of the young prince Alexander. These readings, like in the A-side, focus on the two most important aspects, in my opinion, of Alexander's education. That's politics and rhetoric. We'll just have to return to Aristotle's teachings on other subjects another time. For instance, Aristotle's Poetics, a work on the ins and outs of epic and tragedy, honestly deserves an entire episode all on its own. I would love to know Alexander's thoughts on Aristotle's argument in there, that poetry and tragedy speak to deeper universal truths than the particulars of history writing, historiography. And Aristotle will keep popping up at pretty much every other episode on future philosophers, like Theophrastus, Aristotle's close colleague and a successor as head of Aristotle's school in Athens, the Lyceum. Anyways, I'm getting distracted. On to the main texts. Keep in mind that both texts today, as we have them, were probably written for an Athenian audience, a direct democracy where citizens had to persuade each other to vote on countless political and judicial matters. But also keep in mind that these ideas and beliefs were also taught in some form to Alexander, albeit probably with a Macedonian monarchic twist. So first, Aristotle's Politics. As you listen to these excerpts, imagine Alexander and his designated friends in the sacred Nymphion at Mieza, pondering how he, Alexander, will rule his future kingdom. And, though they don't know it yet, how they, Ptolemy and Lysimachus and all the others, will rule their successor states. Aristotle's Politics, Book 1, Chapter 1. Every state is, as we see, a sort of partnership, and every partnership is formed with a view to some good, since all the actions of all mankind are done with a view to what they think to be good. It is therefore evident that, while all partnerships aim at some good, the partnership that is the most supreme of all and includes all the others does so most of all, and aims at the most supreme of all goods. And this is the partnership entitled the state, the political association. Those, then, who think that the natures of the statesman, the royal ruler, the head of an estate, and the master of a family are the same, are mistaken. They imagine that the difference between these various forms of authority is one of greater and smaller numbers, not a difference in kind. That is, that the ruler over a few people is a master, over more the head of an estate, over more still a statesman or royal ruler, as if there were no difference between a large household and a small city. And also, as to the statesman and the royal ruler, they think that one who governs as sole head is royal, and one who, while the government follows the principles of the science of royalty, takes turns to govern and be governed, is a statesman. But these views are not true. And a proof of what we assert will appear if we examine the question in accordance with our regular method of investigation. and every other matter is necessary to analyze the composite whole down to its uncompounded elements, for these are the smallest parts of the whole. So too with the state. By examining the elements of which it is composed, we shall better discern in relation to these different kinds of rulers what is the difference between them, and whether it is possible to obtain any scientific precision in regard to the various statements made above. In this subject, as in others, the best method of investigation is to study things in the process of development from the beginning. The first coupling together of persons, then, to which necessity gives rise, is that between those who are unable to exist without one another, namely the union of female and male for the continuance of the species. And this is not of deliberate purpose, but with man, as with other animals and with plants, there is a natural instinct to desire to leave behind one another being of the same sort of oneself, and the union of natural ruler and natural subject for the sake of security. For one that can foresee with his mind is naturally ruler and naturally master, and one that can do these things with his body is subject and naturally a slave, so that master and slave have the same interest. Thus, the female and the slave are by nature distinct, for nature makes nothing as the cutlers make the Delphic knife in a miserly way, but one thing for one purpose, for so each tool will be turned out in the finest perfection, if it serves not many uses but one. Yet among barbarians, the female and the slave have the same rank, and the cause of this is that barbarians have no class of natural rulers, but with them the conjugal partnership is a partnership of female slave and male slave. Hence the saying of the poets, "'Tis right that Greeks should rule barbarians," implying that barbarian and slave are the same in nature. From these two partnerships, then, is the first composed the household, and Hesiod was right when he wrote, "First and foremost, a house and a wife and an ox for the plowing." For the ox serves instead of a servant for the poor. The partnership, therefore, that comes about in the course of nature for everyday purposes is the house, the persons whom Charondas speaks as meal-tub fellows, and the Cretan Epimenides as manger fellows. On the other hand, the primary partnership made up of several households for the satisfaction of not mere daily needs is the village. The village, according to the most natural account, seems to be a colony from a household, formed of those who some people speak of as fellow nurslings, sons and sons' sons. It is owing to this that our cities were at first under royal sway, and that foreign races are so still, because they were made up of parts that were under royal rule. For every household is under the royal rule of its eldest member, so that the colonies from the household were so too, because of the kinship with their members. And this is what Homer means. "And each one is lawgiver to his children and his wives." For his Cyclopes live in scattered families. And that is the way in which people used to live in early times. Also, this explains why all races speak of the gods as ruled by a king, because they themselves too are some of them actually now so ruled, and in other cases used to be of old. And as men imagine the gods in human form, so also they suppose their manner of life to be like their own. The partnership finally composed of several villages is the city-state. It has at last attained the limit of virtually complete self-sufficiency, and thus, while it comes into existence for the sake of life, it exists for the good life. Hence, every city-state exists by nature, inasmuch as the first partnerships so exist. For the city-state is the end of the other partnerships, and nature is an end, since that which each thing is when its growth is completed, we speak of as being the nature of each thing. For instance, of a man, a horse, a household. Again, the object for which a thing exists, its end, is its chief good. and self-sufficiency is an end and a chief good. From these things, therefore, it is clear that the city-state is a natural growth, and that man is by nature a political animal. And a man that is by nature, and not merely by fortune, cityless, is either low in the scale of humanity or above it, like the clanless, lawless, hearthless man reviled by Homer. For he is by nature cityless and also a lover of war, inasmuch as he resembles an isolated piece at droughts. And why man is a political animal in a greater measure than any bee or any gregarious animal is clear. For nature, as we declare, does nothing without purpose, and man alone of the animals possesses speech. The mere voice, it is true, can indicate pain and pleasure, and therefore is possessed by the other animals as well. For their nature has been developed so far as to have sensations of what is painful and pleasant, and to signify those sensations to one another. But speech is designed to indicate the advantageous and the harmful, and therefore also the right and the wrong. For it is the special property of man, in distinction from the other animals, that he alone has perception of good and bad, and right and wrong, and the other moral qualities. And it is partnership in these things that makes a household and a city-state. Thus also, the city-state is prior in nature to the household, and to each of us individually. For the whole must necessarily be prior to the part, since, when the whole body is destroyed, foot or hand will not exist except in an equivocal sense, like the sense in which one speaks of a hand sculptured in stone as a hand, because a hand in those circumstances will be a hand spoiled, and all things are defined by their function and capacity, so that when they are no longer such as to perform their function, they must not be said to be the same things, but to bear their names in an equivocal sense. It is therefore clear that the state is also prior by nature to the individual. For if each individual, when separate, is not self-sufficient, he must be related to the whole state as other parts are to their whole. While a man who is incapable of entering into partnership, or who is so self-sufficing that he has no need to do so, is no part of a state, so that he must either be a lower animal or a god. Therefore, the impulse to form a partnership of this kind is present in all men by nature. But the man who first united people in such a partnership was the greatest of benefactors. For as man is the best of the animals when perfected, so he is the worst of all when sundered from law and justice. For unrighteousness is most pernicious when possessed of weapons, and man is born possessing weapons for the use of wisdom and virtue, which it is possible to employ entirely for the opposite ends. Hence, when devoid of virtue, man is the most unscrupulous and savage of animals, and the worst in regard to sexual indulgence and gluttony. Justice, on the other hand, is an element of the state. For judicial procedure, which means the decision of what is just, is the regulation of the political partnership. In the next section, Aristotle discusses kingship. Imagine again the young Alexander heeding or ignoring this advice when he's later tasked with justifying his rule over so many myriad peoples and cultures. Excerpts from Aristotle's Politics, Book 3, Chapter 4. And perhaps it is well, after the subjects that have been discussed, to pass over, to consider royal government. For we pronounce this to be one of the correct constitutions. And it has to be considered whether it is advantageous for a city or a country that is to be well administered to be ruled by a king, or whether it is not so, but some other constitution is more expedient, or whether royal rule is expedient for some states and not for others. But it is needful to decide first whether there is only one sort of kingship or whether it has several varieties. Now, it is at all events easy to discern that kingship includes several kinds, and that the mode of government is not the same in all. There is another sort of monarchy, examples of which are kingships existing among some of the barbarians. The power possessed by all of these resembles that of tyrannies, but they govern according to law and are hereditary. For because the barbarians are more servile in their nature than the Greeks, and the Asiatics than the Europeans, they endure despotic rule without any resentment. These kingships, therefore, are for these reasons of a tyrannical nature, but they are secure because they are hereditary and rule by law. Also, their bodyguard is of a royal and not a tyrannical type for the same reason. For kings are guarded by the citizens in arms, whereas tyrants have foreign guards. For kings rule in accordance with law and over willing subjects, but tyrants rule over unwilling subjects, owing to which kings take their guards from among the citizens, but tyrants have them to guard against the citizens. These kingships, then, differ from one another in this manner. But a fifth kind of kingship is when a single ruler is sovereign over all matters in the way in which each race and each city is sovereign over its common affairs. This monarchy ranges with the rule of a master over a household. For just as the master's rule is a sort of monarchy in the home, so absolute monarchy is domestic mastership over a city, or over a race or several races. The remaining mode of kingship is a kind of constitution, so that it is necessary to consider this one and to run over the difficulties that it involves. The starting point of the inquiry is the question whether it is more advantageous to be ruled by the best men or by the best laws. Those of the opinion that it is advantageous to be governed by the king think that laws enunciate only general principles, but do not give directions for dealing with circumstances as they arise. So that in an art of any kind, it is foolish to govern procedure by written rules. And indeed, in Egypt, physicians have the right to alter their prescription after 4 days, although if one of them alters it before, he does so at his own risk. It is clear, therefore, that government according to written rules, that is, laws, is not the best, for the same reason. At the same time, however, rulers ought to be in possession of the general principle before mentioned as well, and a thing that does not contain the emotional element is generally superior to a thing in which it is innate. Now, the law does not possess this factor, but every human soul necessarily has it. But perhaps one might say that in compensation for this, a single ruler will decide better about particular cases. Therefore, it is clear that on the one hand, the ruler must necessarily be a legislator, and that there must be laws laid down, although these must not be sovereign where they go astray. Admittedly, in all other cases, they ought to be sovereign. But on the other hand, in matters which it is impossible for the law either to decide at all or to decide well, ought the one best man to govern, or all the citizens? As it is, the citizens assembled hear lawsuits and deliberate and give judgments, but these judgments are all on particular cases. Now, no doubt any one of them individually is inferior compared with the best man, but a state consists of a number of individuals, and just as a banquet to which many contribute dishes is finer than a single plain dinner, for this reason, in many cases, a crowd judges better than any single person. Also, the multitude is more incorruptible. Just as the larger stream of water is purer, so the mass of citizens is less corruptible than the few. And the individual's judgment is bound to be corrupted when he is overcome by anger or some other such emotion. Whereas in the other case, it is a difficult thing for all the people to be roused to anger and go wrong together. But the multitude must consist of the free men, doing nothing apart from the law except about matters as to which the law must of necessity be deficient. And if this is not indeed easy to ensure in the case of many men, yet if there were a majority of good men and good citizens, would an individual make a more incorruptible ruler, or rather those who though the majority in number, yet are all good. The majority, is it not obvious? But it will be said that they will split up into factions, whereas with a single ruler, this cannot happen. But against this must perhaps be set the fact that they are as virtuous in soul as the single ruler. And even if one held that royal government is best for states, what is to be the position as regards the king's children? Is the sovereignty to be hereditary? But this will be disastrous if the king's sons turn out to be like what some have been. It may be said that the king, being sovereign, will not in that case bequeath the throne to his children. But that is too much to be easy to believe. It would be difficult for a king to disinherit his sons, and an act of virtue above the level of human nature. And there is difficulty also about the royal power. Ought the man who is to reign as king to have an armed force about him, by means of which he will have power to compel those who may be unwilling to obey? Or, if not, how is it possible for him to administer his office? For even if he were a law-abiding sovereign and never acted according to his own will against the law, nevertheless it would be essential for him to have power behind him, whereby to safeguard the laws. Probably, therefore, it is not difficult to define the regulations for a king of this sort. He must have a force of his own, but the force must be only so large as to be stronger than a single individual, or even several individuals banded together, but weaker than the multitude, on the principle on which the men of old times used to assign bodyguards whenever they appointed somebody as what they termed Aesimnetes, or tyrant of the state. And also, when Dionysius asked for his guards, somebody advised him to give the same number of guards to the citizens of Syracuse. This, then, more or less, is the case advanced by those who argue against kingship. But perhaps, although this is a true account of the matter in some cases, it does not apply to others. For there is such a thing as being naturally fitted to be controlled by a master, and in another case to be governed by a king, and in another to exercise citizenship, and a different government is just an expedient for different people. But there is no such thing as natural fitness for tyranny, nor for any other of the forms of government that are divergences, for these come about against nature. But merely from what has been said, it is clear that among people who are alike and equal, it is neither expedient nor just for one to be sovereign over all, neither when there are no laws, but he himself is in the place of law, nor when there are laws, neither when both sovereign and subjects are good, nor when they are both bad, nor yet when the sovereign is superior in virtue except in a certain manner. What this manner is must be stated, and in a way it has been stated already even before. But first we must define what constitutes fitness for royal government, what fitness for aristocracy, and what for a republic. A fit subject for royal government is a populace of such a sort as to be naturally capable of producing a family of outstanding excellence for political leadership. A community fit for aristocracy is one that naturally produces a populace capable of being governed under the form of government fit for free men, by those who are fitted by virtue for taking the part of leaders in constitutional government. A republican community, one in which there naturally grows up a military populace, capable of being governed and of governing under a law that distributes the office among the well-to-do in accordance with merit. When, therefore, it comes about that there is either a whole family or even some one individual that differs from the other citizens in virtue so greatly that his virtue exceeds that of all the others, then it is just for this family to be the royal family, or this individual king, and sovereign over all matters. For, as has been said before, this holds good not only in accordance with the right that is usually brought forward by those who are founding aristocratic and oligarchic constitutions, and from the other side by those who are founding democratic ones, for they all make their claim on the ground of superiority, though not the same superiority. But it also holds good in accordance with the right spoken of before. For It is not seemly to put to death or banish, nor yet obviously to ostracize such a man. Nor is it seemly to call upon him to take his turn as a subject. For it is not in the order of nature for the part to overtop the whole, but the man that is so exceptionally outstanding has come to overtop the whole community. Hence, it only remains for the community to obey such a man, and for him to be sovereign not in turn, but absolutely. Let this be our answer to the questions as regards kingship. What are its varieties, and whether it is disadvantageous for states or advantageous, and for what states and under what conditions. In the next section, Aristotle discusses the ideal city, its location, orientation, and citizen body, among other things. Scholars often cite parts of this passage in connection with Alexandria, which, after all, does follow some of these principles. So, imagine Alexander and perhaps Ptolemy internalizing these ideals, and maybe, just maybe, remembering those ideals when planning out a brand new city on the western shores of Egypt. Aristotle Politics, Book 7, Chapter 10. It has been said before that the city should, so far as circumstances permit, be in communication alike with the mainland, the sea, and the whole of its territory. The site of the city itself we must pray that fortune may place on sloping ground, having regard to 4 considerations. First, as a thing essential, the consideration of health. For cities whose site slopes east or towards the breeze that blows from the sunrise are more healthy, and in the second degree, those that face away from the north wind, for those are milder in winter. And among the remaining considerations, a sloping site is favorable both for political and for military purposes. For military purposes, therefore, the site should be easy of exit for the citizens themselves and difficult for the adversary to approach and to blockade, and it must possess, if possible, a plentiful natural supply of pools and springs. But failing this, a mode has been invented of supplying water by means of constructing an abundance of large reservoirs for rainwater, so that a supply may never fail the citizens when they are debarred from their territory by war. And since we have to consider the health of the inhabitants, and this depends upon the place being well situated, both on healthy ground and with a healthy aspect, and secondly, upon using wholesome water supplies, the following matter also must be attended to as of primary importance. Those things which we use for the body in the largest quantity and most frequently contribute most to health, and the influence of the water supply and of the air is of this nature. Hence, in wise cities, if all the sources of water are not equally pure, and there is not an abundance of suitable springs, the water supplies for drinking must be kept separate from those for other requirements. As to fortified positions, what is expedient is not the same from all forms of constitutions alike. For example, a citadel hill is suitable for oligarchy and monarchy, and a level site for democracy. Neither is favorable to an aristocracy, but rather several strong positions. The arrangement of the private dwellings is thought to be more agreeable and more convenient for general purposes if they are laid out in straight streets, after the modern fashion, that is, the one introduced by Hippodamus. But it is more suitable for security and war if it is on the contrary plan, as cities used to be in ancient times. For that arrangement is difficult for foreign troops to enter and to find their way about in when attacking. Hence, it is well to combine the advantages of both plans, for this is possible if the houses are laid out in the way which among the farmers some people call on the slant in the case of vines, and not to lay out the whole city in a straight streets, but only certain parts and districts, for in this way it will combine security with beauty. As regards walls, those who state that cities which pretend to valor should not have them hold too old-fashioned a view, and that though they see that the cities that indulge in that form of vanity are refuted by experience. It is true that against an evenly matched foe and one little superior in numbers, it is not honorable to try to secure oneself by the strength of one's fortifications. But as it may possibly happen that the superior numbers of the attackers may be too much for the human valor of a small force, if the city is to survive and not suffer disaster or insult, the securest fortification of walls must be deemed to be the most warlike, particularly in view of the inventions that have been now made in the direction of precision with missiles and artillery for sieges. To claim not to encompass cities with walls is like desiring the country to be easy to invade and stripping it of hilly regions, and similarly, not surrounding even private dwellings with house walls on the ground that the inhabitants will be more cowardly. Another point, moreover, that must not be forgotten is that those who have walls round the city can use their cities in both ways, both as walled cities and as open ones. Whereas cities not possessing walls cannot be used in both ways. If then this is so, not only must walls be put round a city, but also attention must be paid to them in order that they may be suitable both in regard to the adornment of the city and in respect of military requirements, especially the new devices recently invented. For just as the attackers of a city are concerned to study the means by which they can gain the advantage, so also for the defenders some devices have already been invented and others they must discover and think out. For people do not even start attempting to attack those who are well prepared. And since the multitude of citizens must be distributed in separate messes, and the city walls must be divided by guard posts and towers in suitable places, it is clear that these facts themselves call for some of the messes to be organized at these guard posts. These things, then, might be arranged in this manner. But it is fitting that the dwellings assigned to the gods and the most important of the official messes should have a suitable site, and the same for all, excepting those temples which are assigned a special place apart by the law, or else by some utterance of the Pythian oracle. And the site would be suitable if it is one that is sufficiently conspicuous in regard to the excellence of its position, and also of superior strength in regard to the adjacent parts of the city. It is convenient that below this site should be laid out an agora of the kind customary in Thessaly, which they call a free agora. That is, one which has to be kept clear of merchandise and into which no artisan or farmer or any other such person may intrude unless summoned by the magistrates. It would give amenity to the site if the gymnasion of the older men were also situated here, for it is proper to have this institution also divided according to ages, and for certain magistrates to pass their time among the youths, while the older men spend theirs with the magistrates. For the presence of the magistrates before the men's eyes most engenders true respect and a free man's awe. The agora for merchandise must be different from the free agora, and in another place. It must have a site convenient for the collection there of all the goods sent from the seaport and from the country. And as the divisions of the state's populace include priests and magistrates, it is suitable that the priests' mess rooms also should have their position around that of the sacred buildings. And all the magistracies that superintend contracts and the registration of actions at law, summonses, and other such matters of administration, and also those that deal with the control of the markets and with what is termed policing the city, should have buildings adjacent to an agora or some public place of resort. And such a place is the neighborhood of the business agora. For we assign the upper agora as the place in which to spend leisure, and this one for necessary business. On to Anaximenes. The first section you'll hear is exciting to me because this is our first source on this show found preserved in papyrus in Egypt. At the site of El Hibe in Upper Egypt, south of Memphis, archaeologists found mummies. Okay, Big deal, mummies in Egypt. But these mummies were wrapped in layers of papyrus recycled from discarded documents. One of these recycled papyri sheets contains the first 4 chapters of Anaximenes' Rhetoric to Alexander. These papyri date to the late 300s BCE. So, just a decade or two after Alexander's arrival, probably just a few decades after Anaximenes' original composition, some Greek reader brought this text to Egypt and read it and kept it and had it copied. This text is some of our very earliest evidence of Greek philosophy in the Hellenistic period being transmitted to Egypt, all the way south to the small town of Hebe, no less. So, back to 342 BCE. As you listen, imagine the young 14-year-old Prince Alexander taking this advice and knowing that, as king, he will need to be skilled in convincing his soldiers, his subjects, his generals at the least, to follow him, to trust him, to go to war alongside him. Remember that Alexander will have to persuade his men countless times to go further and further east, past Babylon and Persepolis, until in India, he can finally persuade them no further. And perhaps, imagine later, a reader fluent in Greek reading aloud this text to his friends in the town of Hebe, all the way south in Upper Egypt. Anaximenes, Rhetoric to Alexander, Chapter 1, and excerpts from Chapter 2. There are 3 genres of political speeches: demagogic, epidictic, and forensic. And of these, there are 7 species: proposition, opposition, praise, criticism, prosecution, defense, and investigation, either itself, by itself, or with another species. That is how many species of speeches there are, and we use them in public democratic debates, in legal pleading over contracts, and in private discussions. We could speak about these matters most readily if we took them up individually and enumerated their capacities, their uses, and their practices, and if we went through proposition and opposition first, since their use is most common in private discussions and in public democratic debates. Generally speaking, a proposition speech is an appeal to choices, words, or actions, and an opposition speech is a deterrence of choices, words, or actions. Given these definitions, the proposing speaker must demonstrate that those things for which he is appealing are just, legal, advantageous, noble, pleasant, and easy to do. And if not, he must demonstrate that they are possible whenever he is exhorting something difficult, and that they are necessary to do. But the opposing speaker must convey deterrence through the opposite, that to do it is neither just nor legal, nor advantageous, nor noble, nor pleasant, nor possible. If not, that it requires hard work and is unnecessary. All actions involve both of these, so that no one taking either of these positions will be at a loss for words. These, then, are the things that proposing and opposing speakers ought to strive for. I shall try to define what each of them is, and show where we shall be well supplied with them for the speeches. Just is defined as the unwritten custom of all, or of most, which distinguishes the noble from the base. That is, to honor one's parents, to treat friends well, and to return favors to benefactors. The written laws do not direct people to do these and like things, but they are regulated by unwritten custom and common law. These are the things that are just. Law is a common agreement of a city directing in writing how everything must be done. The advantageous is defined as protection of existing goods, acquisition of non-present goods, disposal of existing harms, or the prevention of damages that are expected to occur. For individuals, you will distinguish it with regard to body, soul, and possessions. For the body, strength, beauty, and health are advantageous. For the soul, courage, wisdom, and a sense of justice. Possessions include friends, money, and property. The opposite of these are disadvantageous. For a city, the following sorts of things are advantageous: harmony, military capacities, money, and a good supply of revenues, and a quality and a quantity of allies. In sum, we think everything like these advantageous and their contraries disadvantageous. Noble are the things from which a good reputation and reputable honor accrues to those who do them. Pleasant are those things that produce joy. Easy are those things accomplished in at the least time and with the least effort and cost. Possible are all those things that have the possibility to occur. Necessary are things for us to do, not because of ourselves, but because of divine or human necessity. These then are things just, legal, advantageous, noble, pleasant, easy, and possible, and necessary. We shall be well supplied to speak about them from what has been said here earlier, from things similar and opposite to them, and from what has been judged already, either by the gods or by reputable people, by judges, or by our adversaries. What the just is, we have made clear earlier. What is similar to the just is of this sort. For instance, just as we think it is just to obey one's parents, in the same manner it is fitting for sons to imitate their father's actions. And just as it is just to reciprocate those who do good, so it is just for us not to harm those doing nothing wrong to us. It is necessary to devise what is similar to the just in that manner. But from the contraries, one must make plain the opposite. For instance, just as it is just to punish those who have done something wrong, it is also fitting to reciprocate benefactors. You will devise what is judged just by some reputable people in this way. For instance, it is not we alone who hate and do harm to enemies, but the Athenians and Spartans judge it just to punish their enemies. By proceeding in this way, you will get hold of the just in many ways. The legal itself, what it is, has been defined earlier, but when it is useful, one must take up the speaker himself and the law, and then what is similar to the written law, as follows. For instance, just as the legislator restrains thieves with the greatest punishments, one must also punish deceivers in particular, for they steal one's thought. And just as the legislator has made heirs those nearest by kinship to those who die, it is also fitting for me to have authority over the money of the freedman, since I am myself closest to those who freed him and have died, and I am just in having control over their freedmen. What is similar to the legal is achieved in this manner, but the contrary is this way. For instance, if the law forbids sharing out state funds, it is clear that the legislator has judged all those dividing them for themselves to be doing injustice. And, for instance, if the laws command that those who care for state funds nobly and justly be honored, it is clear that they think those who abuse state funds worthy of punishment. The legal becomes plain from contraries in this way, and from what has been judged in the following way. For instance, not only do I claim that the legislator enacted this law for these reasons, but also in the past, when Thucydides was relating very similar things to what I am saying now, the judges voted for the same interpretation of this law. By proceeding in this way, we shall demonstrate the legal in many ways. The advantageous itself, what it is, has been defined in the earlier sections, but we must bring it into our speeches, as with what has been said before, so also now with the advantageous. If there is something available, and by proceeding in the same manner in which we went through the legal and the just, in this way also we must elucidate the advantageous in many forms. What is similar to the advantageous is like this. For instance, just as in the wars, it is advantageous to place the bravest at the front, so also in government, it is beneficial for the most intelligent and just to lead the majority. And for instance, just as it is advantageous for healthy people to guard against becoming ill, so also for harmonious cities, it is advantageous to be watchful against falling into civil strife. By proceeding in this manner, you will compose many things similar to the advantageous, but the advantageous will be plain to you from contraries in the following way. For instance, if it is beneficial to honor honest citizens, it would also be advantageous to restrain the base. Or for instance, if you think it is disadvantageous for us to wage war against Thebes by ourselves, it would be advantageous to make an alliance with Sparta and then wage war against Thebes. You will make the advantageous plain from opposites in this way, but it is necessary to devise what has been judged advantageous by reputable men in this way. For instance, after defeating the Athenians, the Spartans thought it advantageous for themselves not to enslave their city. And again, the Athenians with the Thebans, although it was possible for them to demolish Sparta, thought it advantageous for themselves to preserve the Spartans. You will be well equipped concerning the just and the legal and the advantageous by proceeding in this way. Pursue the noble, the easy, the pleasant, the possible, and the necessary in ways similar to these. We shall be well equipped concerning these matters from there. Now, let us determine how many things, what sorts, and the means by which we advise about them in both councils and assemblies. If we clearly understand each of these, the subject matter itself will provide the individual speeches at each of our deliberations. And by first knowing the general forms by and large, we shall easily be able to apply them to each of our undertakings. For this reason, we must analyze the things about which all deliberate in common. To speak generally, therefore, there are 7 subjects concerning which we debate democratically. We must deliberate and speak, and counsel in assembly, about religious matters, laws, the condition of the city, alliances or treaties with other cities, wars, peace, or fiscal revenues. Since these are the subjects about which we deliberate and debate, let us go through each and examine in what ways it is possible to use speech about them. Let us take up the same method with regard to the most important aspects of war and peace. These are the reasons to wage war on others. For instance, since we were wronged before, now that the opportunities have come, we must defend ourselves against those who did the wrong. Or, since we are being wronged now, we must make war either on behalf of ourselves, or our kinsmen, or our benefactors, or to help allies who are being wronged, or for the sake of the city's advantage, or its good reputation, resources, or power, or something else of that sort. When we are recommending going to war, we must bring together as many of these reasons as possible, and after this, show that those to whom we are making the recommendation possess most of the things that give success in war. Everyone succeeds in war either because of the goodwill of the gods, which we call good fortune, through numbers and strength of personnel, through a good supply of money, through intelligent generalship, through the excellence of allies, or through the natural superiority of their position. By taking up these points and ones similar to these that are most suitable to the situation, we shall make clear when we are recommending going to war by minimizing the points of our opponents and making the most of our own points by amplification. If we are attempting to prevent war that is about to happen, we must show first that absolutely none of the reasons for it is present, or that the grievances are small and trivial, and then that there is no advantage in making war. In addition, we must show that our opponents have more of what leads to victory in war. These have just been enumerated. From these sources, we must avert a war that is about to happen. But if we are trying to stop a war that has started, if those who are seeking your counsel are stronger, it is necessary first to say this. For instance, those with sense must not wait until they fall, but must make peace while they are still stronger. Then, by nature, war also destroys many who are successful in them, but peace both saves the defeated and provides the victors the enjoyment of what they fought over. We must also go through the reverses in war, that they are many and incalculable. We must urge those who are stronger in war on the basis of such points to peace. And those who have been defeated, we must urge on the basis of the circumstances themselves, of not being embittered under the influence of their misfortunes, at those who have done injustice on the basis of the dangers that have resulted from not making peace, and on the basis of it being better to forego part of one's possessions to the stronger than to be defeated in war and to die for one's belongings. In sum, we must understand this, that all people are accustomed to end wars among themselves when they accept that their opponents have just claims, when they have differences with their allies, when they are tired of war, when they fear their opponents, or when they have strife among themselves. So, by gathering material appropriate to the circumstances from all these and similar points, you will not be at a loss if you need to debate peace and war. Next is the last section of the Rhetoric to Alexander, and also the last reading for today. But before that, one last administrative note. For each B-side, I'll also be posting the raw readings of the texts isolated, without any of the podcast introductions or commentary. These will be on a YouTube playlist titled The Library of Alexandria on the podcast channel. My personal goal is to use some of these recordings as aids for future students. To my knowledge, for instance, no audiobook exists of Anaximenes' Rhetoric to Alexander, and that will certainly be the case for future texts like the Satrap Stele. If you are teaching history or just interested in hearing rare or obscure ancient texts in an audio format, consider checking it out. Anyway, back to Anaximenes. This last section of the work briefly argues that the orator should lead a good life of his own, so that others will more readily listen to him. Imagine Alexander, too, committing this advice to memory, or at least the broad strokes of it, as far as the 14-year-old could understand. Anaximenes, Rhetoric to Alexander, Chapter 38. Both in speaking and in writing, we must attempt as much as possible to deliver speeches according to what has been said here, and to accustom ourselves to use it all readily. We shall have the greatest number and the most technically sound bases for skillful speaking, both in private and in public contests, as well as in discussions with others. We must be disciplined, not only in speeches, but also in life, by ordering ourselves according to the norms that have been stated. Life preparation contributes both to persuasion and to gaining an honest reputation. You must divide the matters according to the entire system of instruction, whatever you must attempt first, second, third, or fourth, and then do the preparation of yourself, just as in the introductions we discuss matters regarding the audience. You will put these aspects of yourself in a friendly light if you abide by what you agree to, keeping the same friends throughout your whole life, and appear not to change the rest of your behavior, but always keep it the same. They will give you attention if you pursue great and noble actions that benefit the many. Once they have become friendly, when you get to the actions that avoid troubles and create goods, they will accept them as advantageous to themselves, and those that bring about the contrary for them, they will reject. Rather than making your narration rapid, clear, and credible, you must describe the actions as advantageous or disadvantageous. However, you will achieve rapidity if you do not try to do everything at once, but the first thing first and then the rest in order. You will speak cleanly if you do not suddenly interrupt a subject and start on other matters before finishing it. You will speak credibly if what you are doing is not contrary to your character, and in addition, if you do not make the same people your enemies and friends. Regarding proofs, about matters about which we have knowledge, we shall undertake its guidance in dealing with the subjects. But about matters about which we are ignorant, we shall follow what happens for the most part. It is safest in such situations to act with a view to what is usual. For a trial against adversaries, with regard to the speeches, we shall compose our confirmation from what has been said by us. But with regard to contracts, we shall do this if we handle them according to the laws, both the unwritten and the written, with the best witnesses possible in a limited time. Regarding the conclusion, we shall remind the audience what has been said by again discussing the headings. We shall recall what was done when we are putting our hand to the same actions or actions similar to those earlier. They will be friendly to us if we act in such a way that they will think that they have been treated or are being treated or will be treated well. We shall do important things if we put our hands to actions that cause many good things. We must bring about this behavior with regard to our life. By means of the earlier part of the treatise, we must practice doing speeches. Thank you for listening to Alexandria, a Hellenistic World podcast. I'm, of course, very new to this, so please give me any feedback or suggestions. You can find me on Twitter at Alexandria_pod, on Instagram as Alexandria.pod, or on Blue Sky and YouTube as simply Alexandria Pod. You can find bibliography, more contact info, and other goodies on my website, alexandriapod.wordpress.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in Alexandria.